Welcome everyone to the webinar, the Open Door Policy Feedback Loops 101. My name is Dwight Mahalitz. I'm the President of Effective Managers, and I am just so happy to have you here and to join me on this webinar today. As you know, I like to start my webinars with a question, and the question that I have for you today is the basic one: what is a feedback loop, and why does it matter? So the intent today would be to walk through the concept of feedback loops, give you some information about that, and then give you some examples about why it's so important for effective managers to be able to understand the importance of these loops and how to use them effectively in your managerial leadership practices. So the starting place where most people tend to start on this is a Google search. So I was curious about sort of what is the world saying about feedback. If you type performance feedback into Google, you get 319 million hits. If you put in feedback loops in organizations, you get 3.6 million. So there's a fair amount of activity on the web, and that indicates to me, number one, it's an important subject, but number two, there's just a lot of basic information out there that is available to individuals. So that brings me to then, in terms of the perspective of the effective manager, what is feedback? I guess the starting point for me is that it's not about this. Well, it's partly about this. It's partly about giving feedback to a subordinate of yours. You know, is this good? Did you do good work on this? Thank you very much. A pat on the back. That sort of the attaboy. This is good work, and that you did great on that. Or on the other side of the equation, you didn't do so well in this. You could have done better in this. These are things that you didn't do great, and so on. And yes, of course, we all know as managers that when you're giving feedback, whether it's good or bad, excuse me, you have to have two-way communication. You have to hear the other person. You have to give the information in a good way, and so on. But feedback loop in managerial terms is much, much more than that. The traditional information that you can get around feedback loops is this kind of stuff. Coming out of those 3.6 million hits that we had, I came up with this one. It's from the www.dummies.com on giving constructive feedback. I thought it was a bit of a hoot, but I mean, it's good information, and they give a good overview of it. But as managers, what we really need to do is think beneath that. So it's the feedback, and the importance of the feedback loop isn't so much about things like you see on this screen there. It's getting to the fundamentals of why it is that we need to create and manage relationships inside organizations. Those of you that have been on webinars before with me may have attended the 5 Requirements of Effective Managers webinar. And there I talked about what are those 5 things that every manager must do to be effective as a manager. They summarize on this slide quite nicely: plan, do, set context and boundaries, delegate, and establish feedback loops. So I'm not going to get into all of the content on all of these, but today I really wanted to focus in on that 5th requirement, and that is, how do we go about establishing the feedback loops that we need to in our organization. The recorded version of this webinar on the 5 requirements is available on my website, so you can click there, download it, and listen to it. And I've also published a paper which is available in the resources section on the web page, so you can download the overall document. So if we think about a manager in an organization, we're not an island unto ourselves. As managers in organizations, we're part of a team of individuals that all have a common interest, and our common interest is ensuring that the organization does as well as it can. So if we want to attain that common interest, we have to work within a collaborative atmosphere within the organization, so that so that we are able to do the best job possible. So this doesn't happen by itself. I tend to think about and use the example of rules of the road. So imagine if you're driving in a city and there are rules for, and there were no rules. So you're driving in a city and there's no traffic rules at all. Can you imagine the chaos that would ensue if there were no such thing as traffic lights, no such thing as stop and yield signs, no such thing even as conventions in terms of yield to the right and so on. So without that, obviously, we would not be able to move forward and operate as we do today. It's exactly the same thing in the organization unless there are commonly understood principles about how work flows down the organization and how work flows across the organization. It's very hard to get this type of a collaborative effort in place. So today I'm focusing in really on that piece of the puzzle is how does a manager understand what their piece is in the organization, understand how they fit into the overall framework of the organization, and most importantly, focus their very valuable, very scarce time in on those things that are important for success in the organization. What we've found in organizations is that managers just are not able to focus in on their value added work. And by value added work, you'll find that I'm I really like definitions of things. What do we mean by value added work? Value added work is work that only you can do with your capability and in your position. So every position in an organization is absolutely unique in that way. There is unique value-added work that a person can bring because that person has unique capabilities, unique skills, and is in a position that's unique to the organization. If managers are focusing in on their value-added work, there's three parts to that work. So number one is the ongoing operations and continuous improvement. So this is the kind of stuff that you find in your job description. This is what I'm accountable for doing in my job. The second part of it tends to be strategic objectives or strategic initiatives. These are things that are organization-wide. They're usually change programs as a result of a change in strategy or to attain a strategy that's been put in place, and there's delegated accountability and authority for that. So these usually tend to be crisper, project-oriented, time frame, resources allocated, and so on. And then the third one, and this one is so often overlooked, is managerial leadership activities. What are those things that I, as a manager, am accountable for in terms of ensuring that my subordinate managers are working as effectively as they can? And this links back to the five requirements of effective managers. Every manager needs to set aside and focus in on the work that they need to do in those areas for success. So that's set up, but I wanted to give you the foundation for why feedback loops are important, and moreover, what I mean by feedback loops when I use that terminology. So when we talk then about the fifth requirement of effective managers, we're talking about feedback loops, and there are four of them. The first one is the manager-subordinate feedback loop. This includes both, as I have on this slide, delegation and performance management. Then there's the manager team feedback loop, so the manager with the manager's team. The third one is from manager to manager, so I call this the peer manager one. It's how I relate with my managers across the organization. And the fourth one is the manager community feedback loop. So all of these vary in complexity. They vary in complexity compared to each other, but they also vary in complexity compared to the nature of the work in the position and the level of the work in the position. So what I'd like to do now is go on to address each one of these four and give you some information in terms of what I mean by each one of these four feedback loops. So the first one is the manager-subordinate delegation. This is probably the one that gets the most attention in organizations, although I must say that in my observation in organizations, a lot of managers don't do their fundamental managerial work. But in any event, in terms of the feedback loop, the manager has a number of subordinates. I've just shown one on this chart. Part of the work of the manager is to decide what value-added work they need to do themselves. So what is that work that only they in their position with their capability can do? And then from amongst all that stuff that's been delegated to them from higher up in the organization, they need to choose how they can parcel out and delegate work down the organization. As part of that delegation, a really important component is setting context and boundaries. So describing in detail to each subordinate what is the nature of the work, what position description is part of that, policies are part of that, procedures are part of that, but also the managerial take on, this is my plan, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and therefore this is what we need you to focus on in your daily work. So we don't want a situation in organizations where a manager must tell each subordinate what to do every day. That would be ludicrous. So what we need to do is set these, what I would call context, so that people can make decisions and take initiatives that are consistent with what the manager would want them to do. So this is all information that flows down the organization. The second part of this is boundaries. And boundaries are those limits, those things that a manager says that an individual must work within. So it could be nature of work, it could be when to come and consult, it could be how to work with others in other parts of the organization, and so on. So it cascades down the organization in that way. If we then add to this figure the concept of the feedback loop, what we're really saying here is that in addition to everything that I've just said, the manager giving information and direction to the subordinate, the manager must equally get information and feedback. And my main point here is that this is not just with respect to feedback on work that's been done or not work, or work that's been done well or not so well. It's also establishing that two-way communication as part of this whole process. So in setting the context for the job and the position description, working through it, talking about it, getting feedback, understanding where there might be hiccups, what doesn't make sense, where there might be roadblocks in terms of being able to do work successfully, and so on. And similarly, in delegating specific objectives, one of the biggest mistakes I ever made as a manager was delegating stuff to my subordinates and not having the full conversation around the context for that work. So I might ask for something, a report, which I thought was, getting a spreadsheet from finance, pulling out some sections of it and giving me the report, and it would take about 2 hours. From the perspective of the subordinate, I'd ask them in a couple of weeks where this work was, and they say, well, only another day or two and I'll be able to have it for you, because I didn't understand the complexity or the nature of the work that would be necessary to get what I wanted in the format that it was. So had I understood that, of course, I never would have delegated that work in that way. There could have been other ways to get the information, or different ways to get the information. So the point is that in each step of the process, when working with subordinates, we need to establish that two-way communication, understand the position of the subordinate, understand what the impact is on resourcing allocation to them, and understand what is the impact to them in terms of their own personal time that they're going to be able to have available for different priorities. And then finally, specifically with respect to priorities, when we're adding stuff on the top of the pile, that we have that discussion with them about what comes off the bottom of the pile, or what things can be delayed so that they can be successful in their work. The second loop then, we'll move on to it, is the manager team feedback loop. So everything I've been talking up until now has been between the manager and each individual team member, because each job, even though the titles might be the same in an organization, each job does have unique characteristics, and certainly each individual is unique. So therefore, the manager needs to deal with each subordinate on a one-on-one basis intimately. The second part, though, is that there are things that the manager needs to do with the team as a whole. Part of it is the same kind of conversation around context and boundaries for the team. So this is how I expect you to work together. A common one that's often not said is that if you disagree about something, get together, have a discussion, and try to decide what I would do if you were to ask me. In other words, work within the context that I'm setting for you. And also to make it very clear, if the two of you can't agree, then I haven't been clear enough in the context. So come and see me. Both of you come and see me, and let's work it through so that we're all working with the same information here in our organization. Part of this is also how we work together as a team. So pulling together and having team meetings, for example, is an important part of that. Every manager should have regularly scheduled team meetings to provide information that is going to be useful to everyone on the team and to help build that team and to build collaboration across team members. The biggest issue I see with team meetings tends to be a manager getting a bit lazy, and instead of having those one-on-one meetings that I talked about in the last couple of slides, having a series of one-on-one meetings at the management team meeting. So meeting with one subordinate talking about their stuff while everybody else is sitting there kind of thinking, well, gee, that's not too much of too much interest to me, and then going around the table that way. I see that all the time, and that's not a good use of the team's time. You really need to focus in on what is that information that the entire team needs, what is that information that team members need to share with each other that everyone needs to need, what is and on the other side of the loop here I'm going now, what is the information that I need to make better decisions in terms of being a manager, what kind of advice might I seek from the team that will build and get stronger if each person hears the advice from others, and any other type of feedback. The second point I'd like to make about this cascading manager team feedback is that this cascade aspect of context and boundaries is really important. So in an effective organization, a high-performing organization, the CEO would be setting that context for the management team. So working with the VPs to make sure that there was a common understanding of the key issues in the organization, how they work together, and so on, so that in turn then each VP can delegate and set context and delegate accountability and authority within their teams that's consistent with the overall context that's been set by the CEO. And then similarly at the next level down the organization, the directors would do that with their frontline managers and so on. So this concept of cascading feedback loops is pretty important because it meshes exactly with the philosophy as cascading delegated accountability and authority. So the CEO has a strategy. The CEO is accountable for doing some work. The CEO is accountable for delegating accountability and authority down to the VPs. The VPs then in turn are accountable for delegating accountability and authority down the next level, and so on. That cannot happen successfully unless we're also gathering information and understanding what happens at each level in the team as we move down the organization, and working within the context of the layer above so that we're all pulling the organization in exactly the same way. Otherwise, we start to drift the further away you get from the CEO's table and start working not purposefully and certainly with good intentions, but in different directions, and therefore pulling the organization in different ways. The third feedback loop to have in place then is what I call the manager-manager feedback or peer manager feedback loop. So here, a manager, and I'm picking an example of a manager in finance. I think probably if we followed the previous example, it would be a director in finance with a director in operations. So here what we're concerned with is understanding the nature of the relationship that we have with respect to work. So what are the things, let's take the example, I'm the director in finance. So if I'm the director in finance, what are those things that I need from operations, from this director in operations to be successful in my job in finance? And then on the other side of the coin, from their perspective, what are those things that they need from me for them to be successful in their job? Now, if the organization has done their job right in the previous slide in terms of the cascading accountability and authority and the cascading feedback loops, then director in finance and the director of operations should have the same understanding of each other's jobs. Unfortunately, human nature being what it is and organizational systems being what they are, this isn't always the case. So as a manager, it becomes incumbent upon us to seek out those individuals that we will be working with in other parts of the organization, have these discussions, give information, seek clarification, get information from the other person, and get feedback from them in terms of your understanding of the work and so on, so that at the end of the day, we can work together in a collaborative way and both be quite comfortable in terms of the nature of our relationship with each other. The fourth feedback loop is between an individual in the organization and the community. So this one varies a great deal depending on the position in the organization. So if I'm a frontline manager, for example, and I'm accountable for managing a team of people that repairs equipment on the factory floor, my need for linkages into the community wouldn't be the same as the vice president of sales who has a series of significant contracts outside the organization. So the nature of the work, the level of the position in the organization will result in very different types of feedback loops. But my point here would be that each manager in the organization needs to think about this. So again, for success in my job within this organization, what is the nature of the information that I would need to provide to the community for success? And what is the nature of the information, the learning that I would need to gather from the community for success in my job? And understanding that, build those linkages and manage them so that as I go about doing my work, I have a full and consistent relationship with others in other parts of the community in order to be able to do my work well. So the key takeaway then is that feedback loops are not a nice extra. They're actually an absolutely essential aspect of managing effectively. And there's 4 of them that each manager in the organization needs to think about and manage. So they need to think about what is the feedback loop, the relationship management, if you will, that I need to have with each one of my subordinates. What is the feedback loop or the relationship management that I need to do with my team as a whole? What is the feedback or relationship management that I need to do with peer managers across the organization? And then finally, what is the feedback loop that I need to have and the relationship management that I need to do with the community for success in my job? And the exact nature of the feedback loop needs to be built by each manager because each situation is quite unique. So that's the underlying premise of what these are. And of course, all of those 3 million or 16 million hits on Google are important in terms of how does one do feedback? You know, what is the meaning of body language? How do I express myself? How do I listen? What are my listening skills that are necessary? So all of that is really important. And I would say that depending on the complexity of these feedback loops and therefore the nature of the work and the level in the organization, the amount of and the nature of these skills will be different. So understanding what those are at the time of appointment of a manager to a position is important in terms of success in that. But once that position is, once that individual is appointed, then it's equally important for the person to understand this work and what to do about it. So I'd like to close the loop by coming back to how much time do managers or should managers spend on this? In the research that we've done with the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa, we find that managers spend only 55% of their time doing value-added work. So if you think about that number, that means 45% of their time is spent on work that is not value-added work. It's spent, going to meetings that you shouldn't be going to and in conflict situations that you shouldn't have to be in and so on. So from the organization perspective, and I know many of you are within HR, if we are able to figure out how to improve that number so that managers are able to spend more of their time doing value-added work, then we're going to be in a position where managers will be able to, in fact, focus more time on doing some of this very important managerial leadership work, part of which is establishing and managing the feedback loops in the organization. So at Effective Managers, based on the research and coming out of the research that we did at the University of Ottawa, we've put together the survey that can be used in organizations to really manage effectiveness. So if you think about it, if managers are working at 55% effectiveness, and you have 100 managers in your organization, if you can improve that effectiveness ratio by just 10%, that's like getting an extra 10 managers in the organization to be able to do work. So the opportunities for improvement in organization performance are great. So again, I've done webinars on the Effective Manager Survey, and I've got a lot of information on this on the website. Or if anybody is interested, I'd be delighted to talk to you about that and how it works in the organization. So it really is an important tool that organizations can use to help improve their strategy execution, because to the extent that we can have managers working more effectively, we can delegate accountability and authority in the organization in a consistent way, and we can ensure that people are working within cascading context and boundaries, then people will be able to stay more focused in on the strategy of the organization and all work in a concerted way to pull the organization in the same direction. So we're coming down to our last 5 minutes. I do see I have a couple of questions here. I've got oh, my summary slide, sorry. And then I've got down coming to my last three. So just in quick summary and wrap up, there are 5 requirements for managing effectively. Establishing and maintaining feedback loops is an important part of managerial work. These feedback loops need to be complex enough to support the nature of the managerial work. So they're not the same for every job in the organization, and they're certainly not the same for managerial levels within the organization. And managers generally spend barely half of their time on value-added work. So part of the accountability of their managers needs to be able to help their subordinate managers increase their effective use of time. So this is a great point, because if I'm the CEO, I need to somehow create the time to work with my VPs to do this work, and ensure that my VPs are creating the time to do this work with their directors and so on down. So it really is the accountability of the manager to do that work. So now to the last 3 closing slides. I just wanted to let you know I've been in the habit, this is the 25th webinar I've put on, and I have been doing them on a regular basis for the last period of time. What I've decided to do going forward is make 2 changes. One is that we're in the process of making a YouTube channel, which will be publicly available. So this will make that content more easily accessible to individuals. Now logging on through the website, it's necessary to log on and use your email address and so on. On the YouTube channel, it'll be much easier. Plus, it's searchable from the web directly. So the next series, I'm thinking of coming back to probably a monthly webinar event, probably on a regular date, like the 2nd or 3rd Wednesday. But watch the webinar and watch my website for an announcement on that, and I will highlight it in a newsletter to everyone once we launch that series. I also wanted to let you know that I have recently published this book, The Effective CEO, and here I'm really talking from the perspective of the CEO about what are the systems that you need to have in place to ensure that you're driving sustainable performance in your organization. This is also of interest to senior executives, well, actually any manager that might be interested in systems or how to improve effectiveness, but particularly those that aspire to be CEOs, and to HR professionals that are interested in having a more deep understanding of this. So these are available through my website or on Amazon.com. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. I'll now move to these I've got 2 questions here. If anyone else has another question, please do type it in now. The question is that what do you do if your manager doesn't set context for you or give you any feedback? Well, that's an interesting question, both from the perspective of managers and from the perspective of HR. Oh, actually, that's the second question. So the first question: your manager doesn't set context for you or give you feedback. Um, that is a difficult situation, and my observation of organizations would be that actually most managers are in a situation where their manager doesn't do this as well as they should. So my advice in that situation would be to ask the questions. So to ask for the meetings and to ask the questions along the lines of what we've had. So if the manager isn't taking the initiative to set context, ask for the meeting to talk about their perception of your job and how they would see your priorities and where they would see your work fitting into the overall strategy. If you know your manager has a plan and they haven't shared it, ask for a copy of it and ask what are those things specifically that your manager would like to see you focusing in to be able to do it. So you get the drift. It's really trying to manage upwards in order to draw this information out. I know that's sometimes difficult, but to the extent that a manager can do that, it's very helpful. The second aspect is the second question I had here was actually very similar to the first one. Is what is the role of HR when you see that a manager isn't doing this work? And my advice to HR in this situation is, well, partly you can coach the manager. So coaching the manager can help. The second thing that you can do, though, and probably the more effective one, is go to the manager's manager and in an off the record. I don't think we're certainly in the first instance anyway, trying to get any individual in trouble, but talking to the manager's manager and relaying the observations that this work is not being done. If the manager's manager isn't doing that work, I guess the question for HR might be whether the CEO is doing that work and asking that it be done across the organization. And sometimes one of the most impactful things HR could do would be for the head of HR to have this discussion with the CEO in terms of how do we put an accountability and authority framework in place in this organization, and how do we ensure that our managers are doing their managerial work so that they can be as effective as possible. Third question just came in. What role are the skills of a manager? What role do the skills of a manager play in filling the void of ineffective or incomplete information coming to them through the traditional feedback loop? Oh, another great question. So as a manager comes into the job, the manager comes in with skills and qualifications. And if the organization is doing its job properly, then you're having people that are fully qualified as they come into the job. Now, they may need training, they may need orientation and so on, but at the end of the day, they will be bringing a unique skill set. So the perceptions of that manager are part of what I was talking about the uniqueness of each feedback loop, because those perceptions will create filters that the manager has, which will impact on the on what the nature of the feedback loop is that they need, but it'll also be a filter in terms of the information that they receive. So this reinforces to the point that I made earlier, that it's not possible to have exactly the same feedback loops throughout the organization. This is work that each manager needs to do within the context set by their manager, but each manager needs to do in terms of what is that information they need to do their job better, and what do I need to pull out of my team to ensure that they're being as successful as possible in the work that they're doing. So just checking the question and the comments and the chat panes, and that brings us to a close of this feedback loop. So thank you for those questions. I always appreciate receiving questions. At the end of this webinar, there's a very short survey, so I would really appreciate it if you take the minute. There's only 3 questions. So if you were able to answer those 3 questions, if there's anything that occurs to you that you would like me to give you more information on, you can type it into that question box and I can get back to you by email. Or if you'd like to set up a call to explore any of these issues, please please do feel free. And on this screen that you've seen in front of you, here's a variety of ways that you can get in contact with me. Please subscribe to my monthly newsletter on effectivemanagers.com. For daily management tips, follow me on Twitter. And I would accept LinkedIn invitations from anyone, because I think LinkedIn is one of the greatest ways in terms of keeping in touch with each other and sharing good information and collaborating for success. So thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to talk to you today, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you individually at some point. Take care. Bye.
Hi, I'm Dwight Mahalitz, President of Effective Managers. Thank you so much for downloading the webinar. I hope that you enjoyed it and will find it useful. Feel free to check out other parts of the website for interesting downloads. Most are free, some are at a nominal charge, but I'm sure you'll find lots of interesting tools there and things that can help you be more effective. And in fact, that's what my job is. My job is to help you, help your organization be higher performing. The bottom line is that I want to start where you are, understand your problem, and provide services that can help you solve that problem and implement a solution as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Give me a call, drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you, talk about your situation, and see if there's anything that we can do together. Thank you.